Fantastic. Amazing. Well, thank you all for coming through to another episode of Indexer Office Hours. It is episode 56 and the date is the 12th of April. If anyone is new to Indexer Office Hours, we love participation, so please do get involved via voice or text. You can either request to join the stage to speak or add your questions and comments to the stage chat. As a reminder, this session is recorded and we'll be sharing it on public channels, so, keep that top of mind. We have a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about today. It's going to be a very exciting conversation. And of course, as always, we will reward you for your participation and engagement with the POAP. So feel free to keep your ears peeled, or I should say, keep your ears wide open for that secret word to claim that POAP. Cool. Well, I'm going to jump straight into opening remarks. As always, we speak about 𝗨𝗪𝗂𝗧, one of my favorite ecosystem podcasts. And we have a podcast that came out, I believe it's number 59, with the founding economist at Prism Group, Kathy. That for me was a very fascinating conversation. She obviously has a background in economics, and some of the really interesting points that I think are worth highlighting is that when I was listening to the podcast, I kind of came to the conclusion, I came to the conclusion that what we're doing with crypto is turning economics into an experimental science. And I think that's fascinating and quite profound. And that's the kind of realization that I had in listening to this conversation. And that, when we design these decentralized networks with all these participants who are incentivized in particular ways, and they kind of interact with each other, we begin to, experiment with new economic models and see the results of those economic experiments. And I just think it's really fascinating. And, if you guys ever get the chance to, I recommend listening to the podcast. So yeah, that's my shout out to 𝗨𝗪𝗂𝗧. I will follow on with announcements. We mentioned this last week. It's always worth mentioning again. Graph Day is live. It's going to be happening on June the 2nd, 2022. Be there or be square. It's going to be amazing. Some of the smartest minds in the ecosystem are going to be present in San Francisco. There'll also be a hackathon from the 3rd of June to the 5th. Make sure to come through because, like I said, it's going to be a good time. Wonderful. So with all the announcements and shout outs out of the way, let's get straight into Repo Watch. Anna is here, so I will leave you to it, Anna.
Thank you, Abel. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our regular segment, the Repo Watch. As always, links to release notes and PRs can be found in the agenda. And this time, before we start with the major blockchain clients, I want to let you know that we've updated the flow a bit to make it more efficient. To only mention the clients so I'll only be mentioning the clients that have had new releases. However, all of the links to all of the other repos will still be in the agenda, and you'll still be able to see the last releases for the repos that we won't be mentioning. So the repos that have had releases this week. Let's start with Aragon. There's the new release is 2022-03-02 beta, and it includes fixes for integration tools, TX pool panic for multiple sentries, and a few other fixes. So if any of these fixes would be relevant to you, please upgrade. The next repo is Streaming Fast Geth. The new release is Geth version 1.10.15 DM, which follows the release we've had last week from the Geth repo, so version 1.10.17. For Streaming Fast ETH, we have had a release 0.10.0 RC5. This is an important release because one of the command flags has changed. So the flag starting with common-ATM and then enabled or dir or max recent entry bytes has changed. So from common ATM to common block cache. So if you're looking to upgrade and you are depending on these flags, please make sure you change your configs. All of the details, again, are in the agenda. This release also contains a new command. So tools download from Firehose. And this command can be used to fetch blocks and save them as merged blocks files locally. There is also a Cloud GCP auth module as part of this release. Thank you to the Streaming Fast guys for doing this release. I know they're looking to add more stability for our clients, so they will be looking for feedback on this. As I said, I won't be mentioning the other repos, but details are in the agenda. And before we move on to the Graph Stack repos, has anyone upgraded to any of the releases mentioned?
Yeah, we're on the latest version of 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 at Semiotic, and it's been running just fine. It addressed an issue with our cluster, so if anyone's running old kernels, running like Red Hat LTS or whatever, this fixes a lot of issues.
That's awesome to hear. Thank you, Kai. Anyone else?
Yep. We've upgraded our Aragon instances and everything looks good. I'll give a chance for anybody else to share their feedback, and then we should briefly talk about the announced storage, like storage incompatibilities with the next Aragon alpha.
Anyone else? Okay, Chris, would you like to talk about the storage incompatibilities?
Sure, I'll make brief mention of it. So last week, Aragon released an announcement saying that for the next release, which will be the release of Aragon that supports the merge for Ethereum mainnet, they will be making backwards incompatible changes to the database layout. So for this next release, it will not be possible to merely upgrade your client. You'll need to resync from scratch. So anybody who's running Aragon should roughly take the following steps. When that release comes out, sync a new node from scratch. Once that has caught up to Chainhead, you can then shut down your old instance and point all of your workloads at that new node. And then that new node should seamlessly handle the merge fork when it happens. And, will navigate both, pre and post fork. But yeah, the database storage changes mean that you won't just be able to upgrade the client.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. We'll make sure to also include all of those notes for the next release as well. Okay, so moving on to the Graph Stack for Graph Node. We haven't had any new releases. The last release has been the one from last week, so version 0.26.0. Before I talk about two of the pull requests that have caught my eyes, has anyone else since last week, since our last IOH, updated to Graph Node version 0.26.0, and what kind of experiences have you had?
Yeah, so I can start. I upgraded. We were running 0.25.2, I believe, the latest prior to 26 release. And everything went out just as smooth as it can be.
That's great to
Awesome,
hear.
Prod. Payne, did you upgrade it in mainnet only? Testnet
Yeah,
still not working?
yeah.
Test and prod?
I'm not running any testnet nodes now.
What about testnet? When can we wait for it?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure what's broken there. I think the gateways subgraphs need to be upgraded.
Is it still broken? It should be fixed already. I think I deployed.
No, it's I tried something out today on the testnet. It wasn't working. I tried to stake from a new account and it didn't. Like it let me stake, but it wasn't reflecting any changes in the UI.
I'll double check it later. Don't worry.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you for that. So the pull requests I want to mention this week on GraphNode. Pull request number 3440. It's a new request. It has been submitted by Eva. Thank you for submitting. And this request contains documentation on how to add a new chain to GraphNode as a developer. So if you're considering adding a new chain, please check out this PR. I'm sure it will be merged very soon. And again, thank you, Eva, for submitting. Another pull request that a new pull request that I want to mention is number 3446. This was submitted by Santiago, and it reorganizes index for asset type ID variants for future blockchain implementation in order to improve developer experience. The details on the PR actually explain in a lot of detail the reason why this was proposed. But what you need to know as a user is that once this PR gets merged, it should not disrupt previously compiled subgraphs, except for any existing Tendermint prototype subgraphs, which will face errors if not recompiled and resynced. And since we have Thiago here on the call, can I ask you if you have anything else to add on this PR?
Hey, Anna. Actually, no, it's pretty much it. It's just a code reorganization that most developers were struggling when adding new types to the runtime. That what this PR does is actually give some room to add new types without changing the order of previous listed types. In fact, that wouldn't be possible. It would cause lots of crashes. So the proposed solution was actually proposed by Leo. I just wrote the PR, but the idea is that each blockchain implementation could have more room to declare its internal types that would eventually end up into the runtime. Without this PR, you would have like different types from different blockchain implementations being interweaved on this ever-growing list. So we decided for 1,000 variants for each blockchain implementation, so you can keep growing the list more organically, and all the types for each blockchain implementation would be held together. And yes, it shouldn't break any running subgraph that isn't supported by the hosted service yet. So the only blockchain that is currently being implemented and being tested is Tendermint, but we've already synchronized with the Figment team, and they are aware of this change that will break their subgraphs, and they will have to be recompiled and resynced again. But what we aim for this PR is just to facilitate the addition of new blockchain implementations to GraphNode as a developer, in a developer experience point of view.
Thank you, Thiago. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so on the graph stack, in this indexer service and agent, we haven't had any new releases, and this week I don't have any new mentions for pull requests. So I will hand over back to Abel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive update, and we appreciate all the hard work you put in to bring that together. So thank you so much, Anna. Great. Well, I'm going to pass on to Juan, who's going to bring us into Protocol Watch.
Thanks, Abel. Yeah, it's gonna be a fast one. This time we don't have that much to cover. Going into the contracts repository, we have a few PRs. Most of them are work in progress still. There are 2 PRs related to L2 scaling, mostly a possible Arbitrum bridge implementation, which has a few small updates. We already covered this one, but it's still being developed, so it's nice to remember that. There's also another thing related to Arbitrum bridge implementation. It's CLI support for the deployment of the contracts, I think. It's basically continued work on the same branch. And then we have the juicy bit that we're going to be discussing today, which is a PR for subsidized query settlement. This is related to GIP 28, which I will be also mentioning in the next section, which is firm governance, because we don't have anything to update on the coordinate per subgraphs. There have been a few discussions regarding this GIP. It's a GIP that particularly changes a little bit of how indexers operate in the network. We will be further discussing this in the open discussion / fireside chat for today, so I won't be spoiling anything for the discussion. But there has been a few indexers raising their voices with a few like slightly complex changes that might not be for the best, at least for the user experience of the indexers. So yeah, we'll be covering that later. Continuing with forum research, there's no new updates since last IOH2. Going into the pinboard for today, we only have a small recurring theme. There's still a proposal to require a valid POI and allocation open. There's still not a GIP for it. There's also some pending changes for the indexer agent if that GIP were to be implemented. But there's a proposed implementation, which we already covered, but it's also always nice to remember that. And I will be handing it back to Abel for the fireside chat for today.
Amazing, which I'm very excited to introduce. So, as you've kind of alluded to in your Protocol Watch update, we are going to be covering some GIPs. There are 3 really important GIPs that we'd like to cover today. So, the first one is force closing of stale allocations, which is GIP 27. Then we have stake rebates. And then the juiciest of all GIPs that we're going to cover today is subsidized query settlement. So, Juan will be joining me in going back and forth to discuss these GIPs, so let's get right in. So, Juan, if you could introduce us to force closing of stale allocations, that would be wonderful.
Yep, so this one isn't a new one. I think most of the recurring people that come join IOH have already been discussing this for a while. So it's basically the original discussion that Sam Green introduced regarding like zombie indexers and stale allocations. This eventually boiled down to GIP for it, and then boiled down to an implementation which was a little bit stripped down version of the original proposal, which only really changes a little bit of the contract so that you are allowed to close a stale allocation without being a delegator, because it was something that was super simple to work around. You could just delegate 0.1 GRT and just close it anyways, but you would need to have like an extra transaction, which didn't really make much sense. So the GIP mostly only adds that, and also the possibility of having what are being called or considered altruistic allocations for backstop indexers, because otherwise, if anyone can close your allocations, there's also an attack vector there for altruistic indexers that want to serve queries but not really participate in the rewards mechanism. So yeah, that's the main issue. The main issue that it's trying to be solved by this GIP. There's not that much to discuss about it. It's well in its way. I think it's just waiting for council confirmation at this point, or maybe audits. Not quite sure.
Wonderful. I think you did a good job there of answering the next follow-up questions that I was going to ask about this, which is how this is relevant to indexes. You've obviously covered that in your answer there, so let's get straight into the next one. So the next one is stake rebates. would love to hear your breakdown of that particular GIP.
Yeah, thanks, Abel. I'm also really interested in my own breakdown because I'm not so familiar with stake rebates. But the main idea behind them, as far as I could understand, is kind of like a rework of the already existing rebates that are well, they're not so most indexes are not so familiar with the rebate pools because query volume hasn't been growing so fast. But there's already an implementation for a rebate pool live on the current contracts. This stake rebate proposal or GIP, I think it's still not a GIP, aims to kind of like rework that in a way that it's less in favor of what it's being called as lazy whales in this proposal. It's not lazy whales themselves. It's any whale will be benefited by the current rebate system. The idea is to rework that system so that it's not always in favor of lazy whales or whales in general, but that it's in favor of more active and contributing indexers overall.
Perfect. And then swiftly moving on to what I think will be the bulk of today's conversation in relation to GIPs. If you could do us a favor and enlighten us on subsidized query settlement, what you think it is. And yeah, after that, I think what we could do is we can open up the discussion to everyone on stage and anyone who from the audience who wants to step up and ask questions about all of these GIPs. So yeah, Juan, without further ado, thank you. Would appreciate if you could elaborate on this GIP.
Yeah, thanks, Abel. Yeah, so the subsidized query settlement, it was called many names before, like I think query indifference or something along those lines. Like the main motivation for this is to, well, any indexer here knows that collecting and claiming the queries are usually some of the transactions that you usually don't trigger at all because the query volume is still kind of on the low figures. Oftentimes, because of gas costs on L1, it's pretty expensive to claim queries for all of your allocations. So it ends up being something that indexers end up choosing not to do for obvious rational reasons. Like, why would you settle 1 GRT on chain if you're gonna be having to pay like 20 or 40 times the cost in just gas, or maybe even more? So it really totally makes sense to just not settle them because it's the rational thing to do from a like economics perspective. What this like change aims to do is to make it so that collecting and claiming query fees is kind of like tied to the whole indexing rewards mechanism, so that whenever you claim the query fees, you end up the whole process for that allocation, and then you get your indexing rewards transferred to either to your external address or restaked into your indexer.
There we go. So what I want to do here is I want to pause and just do a quick Q&A if anyone has any sort of questions on these GIPs mentioned. Yeah, I'll pause here. Anyone on stage is feel free to unmute their mic and speak, and anyone in the audience, please request, and I'll bring you on stage to ask a question.
Yeah, so I just had a question as far as the subsidy. So is it are you just going to be changing the rules here such that in order to collect the indexing rewards, you need to close all your queries? And the second question is, what mechanism are we going to have to make sure that all the query receipts are collected? Because I know right now my GRT limit is set to like 200, and I haven't collected a single receipt because none of them have been up that high.
You mean your GRT claim threshold, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, well, the idea is to, I think that's part of the indexer agent, but it's probably gonna have to be changed a little bit too to accommodate for all of these changes. Again, the main idea of the subsidized query settlement, I don't know if that's the best name for the GAP, but it's to rework the flow of transactions that you need to get the indexing rewards so that everything gets settled, because well, in an ideal steady state, the thresholds that you set would always be met, so you would always collect them because it's the rational thing to do. But it also makes it so that all your indexing rewards are kind of like tied to the query fee process too, which is something that you, of course, would want, like having your query fees tied to your indexing rewards, because otherwise people can just like avoid generating or resolving queries, right? There are a few caveats to this, which is one of the things that were mentioned, like what if there's no queries being sent for that subgraph, right? Well, remember that the GIP is not final. We are looking for feedback. We are like kind of like thinking about other options. So yeah, it's not that like the idea is so that we can close and settle all of the vouchers that are like going around for indexers that are just below the threshold too. So that it's not important to rationalize whether the amount of GRT on your query vouchers is low or high, because it really doesn't make any sense. You will be closing it anyways because of the indexing rewards. Does that make sense, Kai?
Yep, makes sense to me. Sorry, I was struggling with Safari tabs here.
No worries, no worries.
Amazing. Any other questions?
Yeah, so Juan, what happens when you don't collect any query fees for a certain allocation?
Well, that's one of the things that we want to solve. The current approach that I think Ariel is targeting, or the current solution that he has targeted, kind of like requires you to collect. And this is because of some limitations on how the current vouchers work for the gateways. Currently, the gateways don't really create a voucher for you if you don't have any query fees. So they don't create 0 GRT vouchers. So in the current implementation of all of the external things that go all around the contracts, so be it the indexer agent and the gateways, the issue is that if you don't collect any query fees, you don't really trigger the collect event or the collect function. You don't call the collect or redeem functions. So basically, you're basically just skipping one of the steps in the process. So the way that Ariel aimed to basically check that you've collected is to check if you have GRT on your query fees. Of course, we discussed this. We've been discussing this today with all the feedback that you guys sent us in the forums. And yeah, it's not the ideal thing to do. It's also sort of like in a steady state, this would work as we expected. In the current state, there might be some edge cases. For example, as you mentioned, what if you don't collect any query fees because you have not been chosen to serve any query fees, or because the subgraph has no traffic? Those scenarios are kind of like those edge cases that we're still not entirely sure how to solve. But yeah, in the current scenario, you would be kind of like burning the amount of indexing rewards that you were entitled to, which is not the ideal scenario, of course.
So I just hope that doesn't go through then, in its current form, because that would be devastating for the network, I feel.
I concur with Payne on that.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I think Maple Nodes mentioned it as well. Because with things like smaller subgraphs, like DAOs and stuff, where there are query fees, but there's not many. Also, the fact that there is still a hosted service where large query subgraphs like Premia and stuff can have issues on the decentralized network and suddenly jump off and start using the hosted, and all the query volume goes to 0. And as well as you can, if you're on a small subgraph, is it a full integer over 0? Or because I know many people, their query fees are a fractional number, not over 1. And I think it just kind of enhances the behavior of, you can still go on a small subgraph. Maybe you're a lone indexer, or there's only 2 of you, but you can just go on Playground, hit query a couple times, and then you can get your indexing rewards.
Yeah, so one of the main takeaways is, yes, this current code implementation would kind of like incentivize query spoofing because of this particular reason. You don't really need one GRT or more. You just need one way GRT. Anything but 0 basically will trigger a voucher, if I recall correctly, in the allocation exchange. And that would allow you to collect and process the claim and have all the your indexing rewards as you would normally have them. So yes, kind of like one of the things that I mentioned earlier is in the current implementation, you kind of like would be incentivized to spoof some queries just so that you get you're able to get your indexing rewards.
Yeah, but like I feel like the normal way to do it would be to allow you to claim 0 query fees, so that whenever there's literally 0 query fees to claim, you can still claim and like get those indexing rewards as well, not just depend on that number.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
totally. You could also spoof them to generate some traffic, but yeah, I get the point.
it just makes everything more complex than it already is. Like, we're dealing with already such a hard environment to like the learning curve to be onboarded as an indexer, it's already quite high. We're just making it insanely harder.
Yep, that's not the idea of the GIP. It was just the idea of tying up the processes in the same like streamlined revenue path, if that makes sense. It does, however, have some caveats and some edge cases that we need to polish, most likely. But yeah, I agree that it's not the best user experience for indexers in its current form. We are doing some research on how that could be changed. Again, there are some limitations in the current form of external factors like the gateways, in the sense that they don't really create your GRT vouchers for you, so you can't collect them. But we could probably figure out some other solutions that don't really require all of this, maybe query spoofing and extra steps that indexers need to do. Like the original idea was just that we tie the indexing rewards minting, if it makes sense, to the claim process, the collect and claim process, so that collects and claims are not really, you don't really need to think about the cost of those transactions, because you will be doing them anyways for the indexing rewards, which will always offset those transactions. But it does, however, have these small edge cases that are, well, albeit they are small, they are super significant.
Sounds good.
I'd like to play devil's advocate, and I mean, I definitely concur with many who have indicated apprehension or indicated these edge cases, and yeah, the increased complexity for indexers certainly isn't desirable. But I do feel like in some senses, requiring that the indexer has done meaningful work in the context of this protocol is a good thing, right? Like we shouldn't be paying out indexing rewards to participants who don't even have an endpoint online. And we do that today, right? There are indexers who have no infrastructure and yet continue to collect indexing rewards. So, I like, one of the biggest challenges is how do you actually measure whether an indexer has a query endpoint online, and whether they're capable of serving traffic. And it turns out that's really hard to do. And from the kind of on-chain contracts perspective, the best proxy for that is the amount of GRT query fees that the indexer has collected when serving queries. And I like GIP. I like that in order to get paid out indexing rewards, you have to prove that you did meaningful work in the context of the protocol by actually serving somebody data. I think like the complexity, I actually don't see, like it's not it's not an advancement, but I don't see it as a huge issue. I think the thing that scares me a little bit more is whether this change would undermine the ability for the protocol to bootstrap supply-side capacity on subgraphs where there isn't proven query volume. But it's not all bad as I see it.
Yeah, totally. We've also explored a few other, like, as you mentioned, Chris, it's always nice to be able to hand the indexing rewards to indexers that are actually meaningfully contributing to the network. I was thinking about, like, what if we were able to have 0GRT vouchers that kind of represent that you have an endpoint online. For example, if the gateway created 0GRT vouchers only if your endpoints are online. There are, of course, many not immediately obvious downsides to that. Is the most immediately obvious downside is that the gateway would have, like, some really important centralized power as to whether it allows you to get indexing rewards or not. So it kind of, like, might become really difficult to decentralize the gateways in the future. So yeah, with that line of thinking, like, query fees is, like, the most obvious choice because everything's on chain and everything's already, like, going through the same contracts that everything else is going through. So it makes everything more simple and easier to decentralize.
I'd be curious to hear from indexers how such a proposal, if implemented, would impact your thinking around query price optimization.
Well, it doesn't change. Well, I guess the way to do it would be to reduce your query fees as much as possible, so you get any queries coming before you have to close your allocations, right? So it will basically drive the query prices down globally, I feel. And I also think, Chris, we're basically in this current implementation, we're basically getting punished for protocols' inability to attract subgraph developers to actually move to off the hosted service to the network. Because I'm looking at my query fees right now. Out of 5 indexers, we're only getting queries on 3 subgraphs, which are basically just subsidized by a node with queries flowing through them. Other than that, we get absolutely nothing else.
I'd like to echo Abel's point. We're seeing the same thing on our indexer. The only way we're able to get any queries, even on some popular subgraphs, such as SushiSwap or LivePeer, the most we ever see, if we set our query price any higher than 1,000th of a GRT, the query volume stops dead. The only possible explanation I can come up with is just that people don't want to pay for the queries. But that's just a guess.
So right now, the indexer selection algorithm in the gateway has like a max budget parameter. So like there's utility function that applies on price, but then there's also sort of like a cap. And we don't have a great diversity of those set yet because we've only just rolled out and started rolling out the tools for subgraph developers themselves to configure that when they're spinning up their API keys in the gateway. So this is something that we're actively looking at from a data science perspective, is really trying to understand, like, do we have the optimal weights and max budgets set, in the selection that's happening today? And we're planning some investigations to hopefully provide better insights into why the ISA is choosing, one indexer over another at a given point in time. And I would hope that we'd be able to share that with the community to give you guys some more actionable intelligence in terms of like optimizing your own operations. Real quickly to Alex's to Payne's point, definitely the goal is not to be punitive, towards indexers for like subgraph developers not having migrated yet from the hosted service. The challenge that we have is sort of a chicken egg that we're navigating, right? So like we need to sort of address both sides of, both the supply and the demand side of the, the market in concert. And so some of these proposals, while they seem like maybe they're, more focused on the indexer side, there are similar amounts of effort happening on the demand side, but it's sort of like you kind of need both to sort of manifest for things to be working correctly. And we need quality of service, in general in the network, to go up. This proposal isn't specifically about QoS, but the sets of proposals that we've included do move the needle on that somewhat.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of somewhat related to what Brandon just said. I wouldn't necessarily draw a conclusion that, the protocol or the decentralized network has struggled to attract subgraph developers. And I say that because, we live with the hosted service persisting. And, we're all about rational economic actors here. And, not many developers would pick a paid service, even if it comes with a bunch of benefits, over a free service. And that free service exists in the market today. So, until that starts to disappear, to me, it's pretty rational that subgraph developers pick the hosted service.
Totally.
Something else. Yeah. Just to Oliver's question, I do think that there's an impact here, and maybe this is where the complexity does start to become out of hand, because in essence, I think it would significantly reduce the ability for an indexer to experiment with price levels. Like, effectively, not serving queries puts you at risk of foregoing indexing rewards. And so that's just this whole extra layer of risk that exists when price setting. And I could imagine that kind of, deters indexers from experimenting with price ranges and might, I don't really know how that would manifest, but there's definitely an angle there that needs to be thought about.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit as well. It's, maybe doing a max budget per query is the wrong abstraction to expose to the subgraph developer. Maybe it should be, over a period of time, so that they still feel like what we want to avoid is, we want to avoid circumstances in which a subgraph developer's budget can be drained, for example, with a single query. Like, you could imagine an edge case where, like, let's say there was just one indexer on a subgraph. So no matter what, that indexer will be chosen. And if that indexer has the power to basically, set the prices wherever they want, in theory, they could drain the consumer's budget with a single query. So it's I think you still need some kind of cap. It's possibly that they're being set too aggressively today for price discovery to happen effectively. So I think that is something that we're interested in experimenting in. We're working on setting up like a back testing environment, or we're planning a back testing environment for the ISA, so we can kind of try and predict the counterfactuals, of like what would have happened, over a given period of time had we used different max budgets or different, weights on combining the utilities or different functional forms for the utility function. So there's like quite a large design space here that we can improve upon. But I think the first step for us is sort of just understanding like how are the decisions being made today and why, and hopefully also conveying that to the indexer community.
I just have a quick question. Are the gateways at this time currently setting a price, and when you don't set a cost model? And if so, what is that price, and is it dynamic?
Yeah, so the gateways do set a price. Zach would be a better one to speak to this than I, but effectively he's actually, the gateway right now is using like actually kind of a pro-social price setting, where rather than trying to necessarily maximize consumer welfare, it actually is trying to set a price that would actually be revenue maximizing for the indexer, conditioned on the fact that if the price goes up too much, then the indexer would actually receive less queries. So it's not just like setting the price as high as possible. It's sort of solving like an optimization problem. But you raise a good point, which is that one side of this market right now, which is the indexer service, is in general using really naive approaches for setting price. And so I think some of the work that Semiotic is doing, along with GraphOps and Edge and Node in terms of integrating the cost model automation, I think that will improve. It gives the gateway more room to improve, right? It gives the ISA more room to improve because you can kind of assume a more rational decision-making process happening on the other side of that market, which today you could argue it's the decision-making happening on the indexing side is suboptimal.
Thanks, Brandon. That was really interesting.
Yeah, one thing no problem. One thing I'll add just to Chris's point is that 100% agree that if the hosted service were to continue indefinitely, there wouldn't be a strong incentive to migrate to the decentralized network. So I wouldn't take, I agree with him that I wouldn't take sort of certain projects choosing to stay on a free service that has really high quality of, really high uptime and performance as necessarily a mark against the decentralized network. So it is a goal of Edge and Node to deprecate the hosted service basically as soon as it's practical. The thing that we're getting on is measured quality of service in the decentralized network. So we, internally we're sort of tracking, when do we feel like the network is close enough for, for subgraphs to fully migrate. Already the decentralized network does quite well for many, many subgraphs, but then you'll get like outliers, where like that will bring the overall metrics down. Like SushiSwap had issues a few weeks ago, or we'll see two quality of service issues surface in certain edge cases, right? Like upgrades or new deployments where you end up with this indexer monopolization, problems, just kind of a chance occurrence. So the network is already doing quite well, and so I'd just say like at a production level of quality of service for many, many subgraphs, but it's not quite at the stage yet where we feel like we could just all in good conscience completely just say like, hey, this is being deprecated in 3 months, move over or else. Mainly because applications are relying on the graph in production, and so we take that responsibility really seriously.
All right, I'm gonna maybe give some more time if anyone has any further questions, and also for anyone in the audience to come up and chat to this. By the way, this is a fascinating conversation, and this is obviously a very important topic. And I'm just grateful that this call can serve as a venue to facilitate these kind of discussions. So yeah, this is a great discussion and one that's very well needed. Okay, I'm going to pause again in case anyone else has questions. Otherwise, we can move on to the next topic, which is more around like feedback on this whole venue and how we can improve it. So yeah, I'll just pause here if anyone has any further questions on the previous topic.
So this is making me think, the whole conversation is making me think about the last GRTIQ podcast episode, and because we're talking about part of it incentives, but also economical impact. I'm wondering if when we have this kind of talks, if we should have someone like Kathy involved in the conversation. This is just an idea. I'm just wondering what everyone else thinks.
You're saying Kathy from Prism Group?
Yes.
She hasn't really been involved in this part of the system. Prism's mostly been involved in like the delegation market and like sort of the allocation mechanics. right now, Prism's time, we don't even have the Graph Foundation grant with Prism has lapsed, so we don't even have any more of their time until I think summer, because they get fully booked. So I don't know that there's anything there short term, but certainly long term, that's something that we could look at as getting input on the market design. But this is an area where I think we know the path forward. I think it's just sort of like we have two agents on both sides of this market not fully optimizing according to the incentives of that market. And so I think, from that perspective, I don't know that there's like new theoretical insights to be had versus sort of executing on improving the agents that are participating in that market.
Thank you for clarifying. It was just a suggestion. Obviously, I know very little about economics, and yeah, if there's no additional theoretical input, that makes sense.
That's just my intuition. Obviously, I never say never. That's my gut reaction is that we've got like a pretty big backlog right now of improvements that we know will have a meaningful impact, and it's just kind of a matter of working through them.
That makes sense.
I would also just add that we have many in the ecosystem. Brandon being a key example of people who bring a wealth of Brandon's just a powerhouse in many areas, and I think economics is one of them, but Ariel as well. Honestly, there's so many incredible people that bring that perspective to the conversation. And I know Prism Group's work has been really helpful for us, but they're certainly not the only contributors in this area.
Well, that's to me, being new to the whole ecosystem, hearing that we have people from all of these specialties, and I'm sorry, Brandon and Ariel, I did not know the extra knowledge that you guys have. To me, that's a very good thing towards where we're heading.
Yeah, we have Chris as a powerhouse here as well. So yeah,
I know.
Well represented.
Wonderful. I could see Ariel's also in the conversation, so I'll leave it to you if you want to make any further comments on discussion here.
I just joined, so I missed most of the conversation. But
we have summarized everything we talked about.
Glad to be here. Did you talk about the stake rebates feature?
Briefly, but mostly the settlement for query fees, the subsidized settlement for query fees.
Yeah, I saw that there's some comments already in the forum from different people. Maybe the discussion around having query fees to be able to claim the index rewards and how that would work, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mostly that having to have query fees does hurt the indexers, mostly the workflow and the user experience for indexers.
Yeah, we talked about the sort of UX challenges, which I think are very real, and we should make it. Our main goal here is to just make indexers indifferent to the additional fixed costs of the collect and claim transactions. I would suspect that overwhelmingly both this proposal and stake rebates, which I'm hoping to have on the forums later today or tomorrow, will overwhelmingly benefit many of the indexers on this call for the reasons that Chris mentioned, where there's a lot of larger indexers that control a fair amount of stake that I don't think have done the same amount of work as the folks in this call of really ramping up on how to serve queries, how to run the full indexer infrastructure. And so while I think on an absolute basis it increases the fixed costs to serving a given subgraph, on a relative basis, I think it makes active indexers far more competitive than in the network than they are today, which I think will, in equilibrium, I think will actually, benefit a lot of indexers. And also, just as more of a side benefit, but Craig introduced an analysis at the last core devs call where we were extending the Prism analysis on POI spoofing, and in the parameter sweep and like the sensitivity analysis that we've done, what came out of that was that one of the most important factors on the profitability of that attack is the delta and fixed costs between an honest indexer and an attacking indexer. And this actually decreases that delta the relative importance of that delta by increasing the fixed costs to an attacking indexer, right? So these are like two new transactions that any attacking indexer would need to cover as well. And that has some other sort of second order benefits in like letting us set less aggressive slashing percentages, for example, and less aggressive minimum signal. And there's sort of like there's like a high dimensionality, like parameter space that needs to be set to prevent this attack. But overall, having this delta be smaller is favorable to the network, and I think also to honest indexers.
I'm going to take this opportunity after that amazing breakdown. Thank you, Brandon, to bring us to the close of this conversation, seeing that we're at the top of the hour. This has clearly been a conversation that has, sparked a lot of debate and discussion, which, makes me think that this venue is a really important venue to have these types of conversations. And so, we're looking to gather feedback on how we can improve this, how we can make this better for each and every one of you on this call. I'm thinking maybe to even reach out to some people who are here on this call and have a one-to-one call about how we can improve this. But yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you to every single person who showed up today to contribute to this conversation. It's really important. These conversations are really important. And so yeah, just a big shout out to each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And I'll wrap up with the secret word for the POAP, which is indexing hours. That's indexing hours, all lowercase. So make sure you grab the POAP. If anyone else has any final thoughts, please shout. And then we can wrap up today's conversation.
Say it once more.
Indexing hours, all lowercase, INDEXINGHOURS. Indexing hours, or lowercase.
Grazie.
Yeah. You're very welcome. Yeah, so everyone, just go ahead and go to the POAP app and go ahead and grab that POAP. But yeah, I'm assuming, we're wrapped up today, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and we'll be sure to bring up this topic again and others like it in future indexing office hours. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Goodbye,
Bye.
everyone. See you next week.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.